This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you, Shine. Can everybody hear me okay? Hello?
Yeah,
Yep,
I
we can
think
hear you,
so.
Chris.
Okay, great. Um, so my name is Chris McConnell, and let me get back a slide here. And I work at Renewable Energy Alaska Project, a nonprofit that does the following here, promoting clean energy in Alaska through collaboration, education, advocacy, and training. My area of having trouble advancing my slide here. Is the Alaska Network of Energy, Education, and Employment. And I work in three sectors, basically looking at anywhere Alaskans get energy literacy and training at the K through 12 vocation, and that includes incumbent workers in rural and rail belt Alaska, and then also seeing what folks are doing in the higher education world and collaborating with folks like CCHRC and ASEP, who I know many of you are familiar with. Today, I wanted to talk to you about augmented and virtual reality use cases, especially in the Alaskan context. And I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint in a minute and just sort of talk about use cases through a program that I've piloted using some of this technology in rural Alaska with a partner named Total View, who's the tech side, and they do a lot of work on the slope, and I'll get into that in a little bit. I wanted to start off with, I think that the really useful aspect of this AR VR in the modern industrial toolbox has all sorts of use cases clearly, but I think that the exciting part now is the power of narrative, that when you get into these spaces, the 3D spaces, the ArcGIS, you have a power of narrative, whether it's training, whether it's commissioning, that you get to construct based on your audiences, how they move through the world. And I use this because it's already being sort of innovated in the arts, in academia, and so what does this have to do with James Joyce modern classic coming out of St. Patrick's Day here, but it's a novel about a single day in Dublin where a guy traces the historic or mythological course of Ulysses, and this professor has mapped the entire city and given a new way of reading, experiencing, understanding that book in a sort of artful context. And I just mentioned that because it seems a little dissonant with some of the work that I'm sure you do and I do in industrial settings, but I really do think that it's constructing the narrative is what the real power, besides the ooh-ah factor of a lot of this AR stuff. And that's my goodbye slide. I'll not use that one quite yet. And I'm just walk you through some of, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the terminology, but Total View is the firm that I've been working with that does quite a bit of virtual reality up on the slope. And I just wanted to get their website out there. I think some of you are probably familiar with the work they do. And that's sort of digitally twinning environments and then loading data, loading manuals, loading videos in a context that makes sense. And when we get to one of the maps I've worked on, that'll make a little more sense. Augmented reality is the ability to manipulate the digital environment as well as wander around it as you can in a virtual. So I put Viewphoria up there because, and again, maybe many of you have heard of them, but they're sort of on the cutting edge of this technology being applied and developed in new ways. And in this sense, it's you could have a remote worker holding a pad up to some switch gear to valves while someone in Seattle is able to tell them where to point that. So that feels very, what a lot of people are doing with FaceTime now, just sort of old school. Hey, I'm pointing my phone at this. The difference with Vuforia is it allows that technician in a different city to actually be writing on your screen, to circle order of operations, and this sort of the idea is that they're over your shoulder. So that allows for some pretty in-depth troubleshooting. The third, this is another Alaska firm based out of Anchorage. I've not worked with them, but they're doing some interesting work where, again, it's in the augmented space gamification. So, for example, I think they're working with some folks at AvTuck in the Marine program there to do the simulated gamification of what does it mean to be a tugboat captain. What does it mean to do some hazmat exercises? And so they've been around at quite a few conferences, and I think their standard show off is a bear spray attack. How to deploy bear spray if you so needed to in a digital environment, which is preferable. But that is an example of gamification and training. And I just wanted to sort of put those markers down before we jump into the map I have here. And let me back this out. So I'm going to sort of try to hit on the aspects of training, troubleshooting, commissioning, as built, as I describe a piloted program that I worked on and with Total View, and was since adopted by Alaska Energy Authority as they take responsibility for quite a few of the powerhouses around the state. My interest in this space is clean energy as efficiency, so helping power plant operators and facility managers do a better job in their world. So I'm going to take you into Scammon Bay and show you some of the work that this has been taken up by Alaska Energy Authority, as I said, and as they do bulk fuel assessments through the state. So we're clearly in ArcGIS tiles that we can label and move around. I'm now going to move you into something called Matterport, and there's different softwares that can do this, but this is going to allow us to walk around virtually. And this is done with the 3D photogrammic cameras. And so obviously this is not real time, but it does give the Denali Commission, Alaska Energy Authority, USDA, all the folks that are worried about spills, protection, the condition of these environments, the ability to just get eyeballs on the state of them when this happened. Now, moving into the training aspect, there's a bulk fuel training program down in AvTech, which, as I'm sure many of you are familiar, the logistics of training in Alaska get tricky. So this is not a replacement, but AvTech is using this technology to supplement their training. So you can embed all sorts of information. This is just a pull-up. I can bring up manuals. I can get over here to the primary controls or valves and meters at the bulk fuel and pull up videos that have also been linked through. This is a slow load, but if I were to click it, let's see what happens. It clearly can bring up a training video. I'll probably close out of this because it's a slow load, but sorry. And there is also an asset management aspect to this that's pretty obvious as well in a lot of rural communities. Where is the manual? Who is the person in charge? What repairs or preventative maintenance has been done at this point? And so again, I'm sorry, I'm getting a slow load on these videos there. And yep, all of them are loading fairly slowly. The point being that it gives you a digital twin of an environment that it's good for folks in a if I'm calling out someone that needs to carry their Pelican case, what tools should they be bringing? It can save money for that community. And it also can be used as just a the high rate of turnover, orientation to the duties that person should be performing. And so that's already in use in the state, and so that's proving fairly useful. I'm going to move over to the project that I've been working on, and I'm going to try to move quickly so that I can sort of throw out a test case that it's more relevant to the work you all do at Ashrae. But this is the community of Iliamna and New Halen and Non-Dalton. They share a single utility, so that's INN. It's a co-op. And I'll also try to, as I speed through this, touch on the process where these images are created. So the ArcGIS exists in tiles that are satellite photos that are updated fairly frequently. And then as we move in here, just before the pandemic hit, I got out to the community and sort of bootstrapped this through my nonprofit and collaboration with Total View. In boots on the ground, we do 3D droning of the facility here. And so here's your bulk farm. These are the main offices. And this is the powerhouse. And so again, similar to what we did for the bulk fuel, we can walk in through the powerhouse and get a good sense of, there's the office itself, and navigate our way wherever we want to through here. And again, there's the Alaska Energy Authority is using this as an assessment tool. They have this on file. Both the images are helpful, but they can get the hours on the genset, nameplate, serial number information. We have our SCADA over here that also is helpful for when a utility needs to hire a lineman, most of which don't exist in rural Alaska. You know, that lineman, the time they spend in the community adds up. And so any sort of pre-work or assessments they can do before they get there are helpful. And then just, again, as an asset management tool, I don't know how many of you have been in a rural power plant in Alaska, but you probably will never see one cleaner than this. Orderly inventory of tools and parts, and that becomes important. Now, of course, there's a shelf life on that kind of information because this picture was taken a year ago, and things tend to change. And I'm going to return to the interior of this powerhouse in a minute, but I do want to get back to just the overall sort of uses of the tool. And one of the reasons that that powerhouse that you just saw, it was so clean, is because INN is actually a hydro community. So 22 miles outside of town is Tazimina Falls, and this is the source of their hydro. Now, this becomes important for the managers of the utility because sometimes that road's almost impassable in the winter. Again, often a high turnover rate when it comes to the employees. So there's quite a bit of training that has to be done, of course, on site, but there's a good deal that can be done through virtual walkthroughs or double checking. What is your PM schedule? Are you familiar with all the equipment before you're sent out there on your own? And again, I'm gonna just kind of try to show off some of the features of the technology itself, and that is that sense of place becomes helpful. So you can, hopefully this one loads, we'll see, give you a sense of what the space itself looks like in addition to. So this is a 200-foot or 120-foot waterfall, and at the bottom of this image, and I just did this with a iPhone to give a little bit more context. You'll see the turbine outtake in the lower left over here, and it's again, it's not going to make or break a training, but it does give a sense of place, and I think that becomes important. This is the control room. And so the sort of order of operations is it takes probably a good day to do a lot of this imaging, and then the real work happens when you get in touch with, and I could, again, give you an elevator ride that gives you a sense of what it's like to go down that elevator through the blasted rock, but I'll skip that and just jump right into the turbine room that is 120 feet below. And it's the a lot of the work comes in the design and working with the area experts. And so again, this is working with the manager of the George Hornberger, the manager of INN. What are the things that he wants his guys to be most familiar with? What are the sorts of things that the electricians are constantly looking at? And giving that sense of, okay, here's what I'm talking about before you come in, or I don't know what I'm talking about, guide me. And then just another sort of feature of the power of this, this is sort of a funny feature, is this turbine, has all sorts of SCADA and alarms, but what they use to know if any sort of wood or debris has entered the turbines themselves is a nickel standing on its edge there. And if that nickel is over, something big has hit that's their low tech early warning system that something's gone wrong. But that's just a sort of bell and whistle that, again, allows you to poke around, whether you're a technician or looking at other issues within the turbine room. I'm going to jump back out and continue on moving down to Non-Dalton, which is a community that is about a half-hour boat ride away from Iliamna and New Haven. And so this is where the largest customers are. And so in my world, when I call this Alaska Energy Ecosystem Map, and I mentioned that we do work in K through 12, vocational, and university, we're trying to use this as a holistic look at how energy flows through rural communities, from the fuel that's barged in to the gen sets to potentially, as in this case, renewable energy. And that, of course, means like who are the end users. And in most cases, that's the largest end users are going to be the school, the store, the clinic, and the tribal buildings. And so again, I'm going to come back to the schools in a minute because that's a bit more relevant to your work that I hope elicits some questions and hopefully answers for me as we go inside the school and I tell you another project we're trying to spearhead here. But the interesting feature of the schools and INN is that they offer electric interruptible power. So the electric boilers in the larger buildings in the schools are available when the river's flowing at enough that they can generate that excess capacity. And so that becomes something that is also just an energy literacy tool for the community itself to understand the benefit of hydro in their region. I'm going to take you over to the New Haven School, and we'll jump into their mechanical room, which is not particularly complex, but we will get a look at the electric boilers, their backup boilers. They also have a backup generator in here. And I'll return to this as you can see they have their backup generator here as well. In terms of commissioning and a project that we're working with, again, COVID delayed, but the plan was to have already been out to back to INN and work with the facility managers for the Lake and Penn School District to get into the schools and essentially Matterport or do the 3D photogrammetry of the entire school building itself. And I'm just going to put a pin in that for the moment and talk to you and again, ask your sort of feedback as we think about HVAC systems, air handlers, boilers, and the like. This is the water treatment plant. And again, partnering with folks at ANTHC. We were able to get in there and work with the operator. And I should say a lot of this falls into the vocational training. There's the increasing the capacity of both electric utility operators and the water utility is a huge cost saver and really quality of life for the community. And so again, I can do the same things, walk around, check out valves in here. We added one sort of extra bell and whistle here, and that's Alaska Housing Authority has a system called BEAMON that some of you may be familiar with, and it's just remote building monitoring system. And so this is what's actually happening in real time in that water tank. And that water tank, just bit of trivia, is apparently the largest indoor water tank in rural Alaska. But so again, this when you talk to the folks at ANTHC, and it's actually a co-op called Alaska Rural Utility Co-op, of their use case for this is, like 2 weeks before we got there, they had an electrician out there, and they saw the utility, and had he seen this first, it could potentially have been a training opportunity for someone there. Some troubleshooting or parts inventory could have been utilized there. And so that is another use case by an organization in rural Alaska. I'm gonna jump back to this slide, and you'll see the yellow lines that we have in here and marked residences. And that we're working with the manager and their accountant, because in rural Alaska, power cost equalization is a lifeline to the communities. And although straightforward, it's a formula: who is resident, who's commercial, who's community. Tracking all that in the asset management becomes really helpful in terms of historically, where are there bad meter reads? Where are there multipliers that are missed? Where are there lift stations that sometimes haven't been counted? So this becomes a repository for some institutional information that, again, gets lost, I'm sure, even in rail belt communities, but certainly in rural Alaska. And then just zipping through this last bit is that holistic look of what are the important places in rural Alaska, where does energy go, and of course the landfill, where so many things do end up, that it would be perhaps better if they didn't. This is an incinerator actually in action while we were there. Telling that larger story, the narrative, again, I think becomes important, whether it's a specific training, or you're talking to a legislature, or you're talking to a board, or just people that want to get a sense of fellow Alaskans. What is it like to live in a community? What are the infrastructure that's obviously important, the clinic, the store. We just, for, again, a bell and whistle, we imaged the interior of the store, because that is a huge divide in quality of life that a lot of folks don't realize. What does a $9 box of cereal cost? It turns out, or what does it cost? What does it look like? It looks, very similar to the same box you're getting for $5 somewhere else. So just those sort of you are there moments, I think, build a narrative that can be extremely useful across all audiences. There's also aspects like use cases. This is IDC is the Iliamna Development Corporation. They sell fuels to all the planes that land in the region, and the pilot has to actually physically go across to the bulk fuel farm, swipe a card, and then the fuel truck goes out to the airstrip. Apparently, that is a huge gumming up of the works for them. So this is a use case for them to just sort of detail A, B, C, D for pilots coming into the region there. I'm gonna jump back to the powerhouse, and I wish that that COVID, for many reasons, had not happened, because I think we would now have both of the interior of the schools completely mapped at this point and have worked with the facilities director for the Lake and Penn region. And the idea being, can we create a walkthrough preventative maintenance for the boilers, for the air handlers? In some communities, the powerhouse sells waste heat to the school, and there's BTUs from kilowatts issues. And so embedding all this in a place where often the city manager wears 7 hats. The principal even can sort of use this in the HVAC world of when things go wrong, what can that person sort of understand? There is, I think, programs that are being piloted around the country that teach students that, hey, your school building itself can be a living laboratory. And so in rural Alaska, I think that poses a unique opportunity to, if there is a digital twin like this, to bring in curriculum, make that energy literacy and efficiency important, in addition to the obvious training and troubleshooting for employees that might be there. And then just as a general workforce development or career tool for those folks that want to stay in the community. There are not too many jobs that provide a consistent paycheck. A lot of them have to do with support of infrastructure. And, I'm at pains to emphasize that this is a tool and really not a replacement, certainly, for all of the over-the-shoulder training that I think still has to be done, and it is a challenge. But this is, I think, a way to increase capacity and skill sets throughout the state. I'm going to show you sort of one other feature we've been working on, and that is I've been taking you through the ArcGIS map, where we've embedded plenty of material, but the sort of end game for let me see if I can get into this. The end game for this map is to almost be a sort of a Wikipedia, a reserve for all of the things. So now you could have your sort of commissioning, your as-built, your more information, manual, PDF heavy, organized in a way that utilizes both the map and then sort of all linkable features here. So we could now just click on where we were at the Tazimina hydro plant and walk through what any operator might know. And so in this case, again, if and we plan to in the spring, sort of get the as-built for the schools and have the area expert, the facility manager, and anybody else who works on the mechanical room give us this information, get the manuals in one place. And the plan is to sort of expand from a high-functioning school district or high-functioning community who's done this and pair them with other communities that might not be on that same capacity curve, and see if that sort of sister city relationship or sister village can increase the capacity of both by sharing someone else's, similar, if they have a similar constructed school and some of the similar job descriptions for the folks that are working there. I burned through that pretty quickly. I think I was trying to get to 12:40, but I am wanted to leave time and ask any I can answer where I can on the technical side. And I again would like to stress it's been a pretty good industry nonprofit relationship with Total View in sort of applying this technology in rural Alaska. The end user could be using this on their smartphone, a pad, a desktop. It is 3G, but admittedly, I think it's not as high functioning in 3G. So that's an issue. As we always run into, broadband in rural Alaska is a limiting factor. But if you put a lighter footprint on what you're trying to do, it is still completely functional with a 3G smartphone. And with that, I'm happy to leave my screen up or keep moving around or sort of pose to you all use cases in your industry. I mean, there's one sort of anecdote I'd like to share is I've bumped in several times to a gentleman named Eric Middlebrook who lives in Bethel, and he is essentially the one-stop shopping go-to guy for any refrigeration issues in tribal buildings or village stores. And his sort of old school method of doing things is he has a little black book with the names of about 4 or 5 people in every community who can crank a wrench. And he does all of his troubleshooting by phone, asking if he can't get Ken, John, Steve, or Franny, then he gets that final person, does all sorts of troubleshooting before. What makes his business model work is he's also a pilot, but before he loads his plane, he has a good sense of what's going to be happening. And so clearly you could see how this would serve him well. And I've passed this through several different school district facility managers, and they all have different ideas of its efficacy or that it needs to be a next generation. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Cheyenne, should I stop sharing or?
You can keep your screen
Okay.
up. Tracy, I see that you're trying to type something. I'm not sure if you wanted to ask a question or.
It might be easier just to ask Cheyenne if that's okay. Chris, we have 3 Matterport cameras at CRW, and we've used them extensively throughout the state to do what you're talking about. They're very useful, and I would agree with that. But what are your thoughts on, cost and training and, the time it takes to use these in the facilities too? There's a time and a cost to doing this in each of these communities and buildings.
And I think that's true. And it ends, of course, what is your end use? And who are you collaborating with? It's the limiting factor is, of course, especially in rural Alaska, it's a snapshot in time. So, I've talked to folks in the Bering Straits region who wish they had live cameras in the mechanical rooms. That would be more helpful to them so they could go back in time and see where something went wrong. But that seems quite expensive and a ways away in terms of technology. I mean, to image the entire New Halen school can be done in a day. The processing of the images is very fast. The work is in, of course, the design of building it out. I know I talked to Darren Hargraves, the ASD facility director here in town, and he saw it. He wished when he goes out to send a junior employee out to do all the as-built, that this technology could have been worked in as they were actually finishing the construction, or here is what the commissioning should look like, and so you've imaged everything, and now you have that on record from there on out. So I guess I'm not giving you a great answer, except for the skill set to do the imaging is not the training to be a good Matterport is, I want to say easy, but it's meticulous. It's like anything, meticulous in your work, but the camera is fairly smart. It's set it on a tripod, level it, be strategic about where you're placing it and how often you're placing it, and then you press a button and get out of the way. It's the combining of the drone footage that also makes things helpful if you're looking at the envelope. And again, I sort of bootstrap this, so we did a quick and dirty job, but the imagery that you can get of the exterior of these buildings is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think the point, one of the things to mention is the fact that you can actually dimension from the Matterport imaging down, fairly accurately on all your piping, your ductwork, and all that information. We can take that from that. In addition, you can actually do virtual walkthroughs, not just via the computer, but like VR. You can actually put somebody and do an actual virtual walkthrough of a facility so they feel like they're actually in space.
Absolutely, and that's another point where, like, you get a little more expensive when you start designing that aspect of it. But Lockheed Martin does some jet turbine training based out of Seattle, and they'll do it in what they call virtual training rooms, where they might have 8 people around the globe with their own avatar around. It's more in depth than a CAD, but they're all around given a specific task with a specific toolbox, and one trainer can then circulate and be over the shoulder as they're each working on different tasks. So in that sense, you can see that the scalability for Lockheed Martin creates some real efficiencies. So that's, I would say, one of the more high-end uses of it I've seen. The gamification and simulation, again, goes from the very basic, which is tough because especially the younger generations, what a game is to them is not putting the cup in the right place. If you're playing Fortnite and all these things, it's hard to be enthusiastic about learning through very simple gamification. But on the high end of things, I know that the United States Navy and their nuclear submarines, you're not going to have a third-year seaman, firing up the generator, and so they have like extensive augmented and virtual reality simulators that are effective in doing pretty technical tasks.
So from my perspective, the thing I want to see before I go out to a village are the mechanical drawings of the thing that I'm going to look at. And I don't know that I would really be too interested in this stuff.
Because you just want to see the drawing, even though it may have not been, especially in rural Alaska, it may not be what it is on that paper if it's been handled by 5-10 different people who have Frankenstein parts. This is a snapshot in time, but the drawings in an ideal world would be maintained, but at least in rural Alaska is often not the case.
That's a
I have
good
a
point.
question. So what are you using for the imagery? Like what equipment?
For the Phantom drones for the exterior 3D imagery are the standard camera. It might be a slightly higher end, but within the 3D walkarounds, that is proprietary software and camera that I said Matterport. I think there's probably they're an industry leader, but there's probably a couple other ones out there as well. And so it's probably about a 1 foot cube that weighs about 20 pounds, the camera, and it has cameras on 5 of the 6 surfaces. And it rotates around, and you move it where you see in this image where these little spots are, that's where the tripod sat each time. And then that software stitches together the images pretty easy. We can walk around wherever we like. And I am interested in the gentleman who had mentioned that certainly you'd rather see the drawings. Do you see, so is there a next step where this might be useful, or is it basically the drawings are going to be the Bible on this one for you, and this is gravy?
I'd say this is gravy for sure. The drawings would indicate what the designer wanted to have happen. and it should have at least initially been installed in accordance with that. So that gives
Right.
you
And
what's going on inside the pipe, inside the duct, what kind of capacity might there be to do something different. What if, were there any problems with the design? You can kind of get an idea of that.
and so that's from the engineer's perspective, but from the personnel on the ground who, it may be a 20-hour a week job, or it may even be the principal who has to, in a pinch, work on this. You can, where we have all these data points or manuals, we can, in these communities, often no one knows where the manual is, or this is the order of operation that valves should be handled. So that, I think there's a utility, at least in the workforce we're finding.
Sure.
That level.
Sure. Especially if they're not particularly well trained. And then you can see the picture of this generator, what he's got to look at. You can point him, if he's looking at this at the same time as you are, you can point him to something and he can tell what's happening.
Right, and that's the troubleshooting, where that first website, that View4ia, is pushing that envelope a little quicker, so I can not only see it but also right on your screen. The state of affairs right now in a lot of the lift stations and water plants are taped photographs of where valves should be positioned and what. So this at least brings from the analog to a digital repository.
So if they remodel, like say add a boiler or something, do you have to go back there, or can they like send you photos and you can add that to like an existing file?
Yeah, I think that's right. So it's obviously being back there and getting a new image is the best case scenario, but because we can embed videos, manuals, even if you took an iPhone picture, if you took a video, if someone notated what the work that was done there, and even again, this is I'm focusing on rural Alaska and clearly not so much the rail belt, but some of the barriers, challenges are people are not keeping track of necessarily who came in and did what when, and so when someone looks at a manual and then is trying to troubleshoot from afar with an operator who maybe have literacy and numeracy challenges, that becomes the visual becomes quite important.
So the other side of this that we saw, Chris, was that we were able to take photos or take Matterport images of facilities that were under design, when we had, or under construction when we had engineers in that community in rural Alaska, and validate inspections and overlap inspections for people who may not have been, when we didn't have engineers going into that community. And just, as reduced cost and a value to our owner to see what was going on in a community where inspectors may not have been on site with the contractors.
Do you foresee yourself archiving that material yourself, or is that for reference if needed?
We can archive it, or, we have the ability to archive it up to a certain number of images. Our storage capacity is, I want to say, we can have 400 stored and 100 active. I can't remember what our Matterport subscription is, but something like that. So, up until a point, but we can also share that with our owners. We can share those links, we can share them, show them what's going on. In some cases, you hand that off to your owner who has those links, who has their own images.
Right. And in that regard, if it's then loaded in, you take the time to do a few videos of that owner, then you have a model for a PM schedule for you. Again, these are maybe rural Alaska specific problems, but constantly you have vents that are lodged open or overrides here or there, that so the system is not being used how it was intended, and so this becomes a back to baseline. Here are the 5 things you should be doing on your rounds every day.
Hey, Chris, I have like kind of a 2-part question for you on this. So you touched on sort of the changes that happen over time in rural Alaska, and I guess I'm curious, how would you go about updating your, I don't know the terminology used, your virtual reality photographs that you have for the specific location? And I guess with that, I mean, so you contract somebody to perform this service for you as an owner. Do you now own, or I shouldn't say own, but are you now, tied to that entity that provided the service for you, or would you be hosting it yourself? I guess in a similar vein, we're used to like DDC contractors where an owner sort of buys into one and they propagate that across facilities. And so the downside to that obviously could be if somebody goes out of business, now you're kind of stuck. Obviously you can still view the software, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and really it's an ArcGIS subscription. But if you're dealing with I think a reputable organization, and you should have the savvy to, on the front end, you own this data, but it doesn't make sense for someone to get into the hosting business for it, as long as the data is easily transferred to anybody with another ArcGIS subscription. It's probably not quite as simple as that, but the data is completely transferable. So whatever you've contracted to have this done, it can exist on another platform easily. The first part of your question, I think, is trickier, but it goes to the nature of the work that's done remotely. And so, in Iliamna, through the course of a week, there's, probably 3 state or federal agencies that are visiting. There's so many technicians and tradespeople in and out that you can train. So depending on who the customer is, in this case, the electric utility. In the case we're working on, maybe it's worth the investment for Lake and Penn School District to get a Matterport camera. And when they do their regular fly-throughs, if something's changed, they would be the first to know and do those updates. It's always good to cross-train people in a community. The danger here is that you sort of expensive equipment tends to get broken or lost if it's just sitting there being used, once every 6 months. This feeds into the bigger ecosystem, is that there should be probably twice a year on-site trainings. So that would be whoever you're contracting to do that would be a great opportunity to just refresh your images. But it certainly, they're not evergreen, the images.
Sure. No, totally understand. Thanks.
And I should say, it's training facilities like Avtech are using this in their power plant operator courses, their bulk fuel classes, and I think I'd mentioned that it's being used, the gamification and simulation, in the maritime coursework as well.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I don't see anything on the chat function.
I'll ask all of you a question. I mean, I don't know how often you are, but the sort of general public education for the work that you do, is there ever a time that you're sort of explaining in broad strokes the importance to a building owner who might not be well versed in this? Is there an application in that sort of general or specific niche energy literacy in your sector? That was a question.
Everybody is quiet today.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when we do presentations, we use a board or maybe we use a computer screen and things like that. But it's at that level, we're competing against other companies. We usually don't sit down and do presentations with owners unless we're in that proposal stage where we're competing on a project. Certainly this would be, cool, but yeah, I'm not sure really how it applies in that instance.
And what about the commissioning process? Do you also feel like that just has to happen in a human to human environment, and that this, I mean, it obviously could supplement it, but is not necessary or sufficient, I guess?
Well, that's a hard one to really nail down. Training certainly could benefit at some level from these pictures. But again, the real where the nuts really hit or where it really hits the road is where what's happening internally, which this really wouldn't help that much with.
Right.
I suppose you could take pictures while you were taking a piece of equipment apart, and that might be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I'd say commissioning is pretty boring. You're essentially just checking things to make sure they function per contract. I'm not sure that would be something that I would want to keep a record of.
Or just how it should be performed, I guess I'm imagining.
What do you mean, the commissioning or how the equipment should perform?
The commissioning, the process of commissioning itself, that when your guys are in the room, making sure everything is as written in the plans, described. So for future trainings, for how is this equipment supposed to be functioning? How is it functioning?
Yeah, in
And
my
that you
opinion,
have this visual record of your guys going.
yeah, in my opinion, that'd be fairly low value. I'm not sure that as a technician, I'd want to spend the time sitting through that.
Right.
Yeah, I think in your similar vein before, Chris, there's always that opportunity for things to be pretty significantly different, right? So, you could look back at the original design documents and see what the original settings were for discharge air set points or space set points, but hands-on is really going to be what, I mean, you probably care more about what it currently is rather than what it was.
Right.
Hey, Chris, can you add the like when the contractors go out there for maintenance, can you add those into the equipment just like you added those O&Ms in there?
Yep. So a history of everything that's been done, and again, whether that's photographic or work orders or parts. So that would entail a relationship with the firm that you've hired to do this, and also design. But again, it's a fairly easy, as long as you have open lines of communication to create a new visible data point in the image.
Gotcha. That was a very good presentation, Chris.
Well, I thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you,
Thanks.
everyone. Unless, yeah, it looks like I don't see any more questions on the chat. But yeah, thank you, everybody. And again, just a reminder, elections are still going on. Please cast your votes. And we have that extra meeting on March 31st with the Ashrae Society president. So more information to come.
So
Thanks,
what's
everybody.
the significance?
Oh, sorry.
What's the significance of the your last picture, the hook on your last picture?
Just let me go back up to it. Part of the Arctic toolbox, northern latitude peoples tend to have evolved with higher technology thresholds, and so the halibut hook being a good demo of
Wow.
the Arctic toolbox. I think that's definitely